Good evening, everybody, and welcome to your Friday edition of This Is Ibrox. We're going to be looking ahead to Rangers' game against St Johnstone this weekend, one of just 3 games in 6 days for Giovanni Van Bronckhorst's team prior to the World Cup. I think it's kind of snuck up on me a bit, certainly. Joining me to talk all things Rangers tonight, I've got Patrick. How are you getting on?
Yeah, I'm well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. And I've also got Kieran. Kieran, I said it myself, I couldn't quite believe it when I looked at the fixture schedule this morning. It's only 3 games and then it's a little over a month before Rangers will be back in action.
Yeah, it's one of the ones. It's bittersweet. It's we all love to watch Rangers, and it's kind of what we base everything around that we do. We organise our social lives around it as well. But at the same time, those injuries are clocking up, and it couldn't really come quick enough for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it'll be here. We've got St Johnstone away from home, Hearts at home, and then a game against St Mirren as well, I believe, off the top of my head. So before we kind of look ahead to this weekend, we're going to start with a little bit of history. Now, not to rub this into any of the more experienced, shall we say, members of the podcast listening, but it's been 30 years since the Battle of Britain match between Leeds and Rangers, a famous 2-1 win for the Gers. Now, neither myself nor Patrick were around when the game happened. Kieran, you said before the podcast that you were, but you can't quite remember it. But nonetheless, it's a great fixture in the club's history, isn't it?
Yeah, and thanks very much for bringing up my age. No, to be honest, this was just before I started really getting into Rangers. I think I was 7 at the time. And I remember back, well, I don't really remember back from watching the highlights, like through all my family talking about it, and they brought out a video at the time, the Battle of Britain, and watching it, because when you're young and you're obsessed with Rangers, you just obsess over everything that's available to watch. So at the time, I used to watch the Battle of Britain video all the time, and I just remember that Andy Gorham was just unbelievable. And it's like when people want to have the argument about who's better, Alan McGregor or Andy Gorham, like you go back to watch like these games, the Leeds United game in particular, Gorham was brilliant. They had Gary McAllister, I'm sure Cantona started up front as well.
Yeah,
we had McCoist and Haitley, McCoist diving header. Like my first ever footballing hero was Super Ali, and it was with goals like that really took me to him. And yeah, just absolutely brilliant. And what a season that turned out to be for Rangers. 2 proper fan bases as well. It was from the slight memory I have, it was unbelievable.
Yeah. If there's anyone in the comments that are listening, we're live tonight with any memories of the game, please do feel free to share them. Patrick, I had a look back at the goals against them. Kieran picked up on how incredible Andy Gorham was, but I mean, what's your pick of the goals? I mean, Haitley's is obviously the more kind of aesthetically pleasing, perhaps. It's just a stunning volley, but I think the move for the Ali McCoist goal is also fantastic. Can you pick one of them, or are they just both too good?
Yeah, I mean, there's no wrong answer. I saw it today come up on one of the fantastic archive accounts we have on Twitter who'll be posting videos. And the Mark Haitley goal, every time you see it, it's just, I mean, you can say the goalkeeper doesn't do amazing, but he just smashes it from like left-hand side outside the box and just places it perfectly. And it's just fantastic. It's a timeless goal that will always be fantastic. And I think that would be my choice, but I have no ill will for whoever picks either of the goals.
Yeah. Well, let's return to the present day. Rangers take on St Johnstone in Perth on Sunday. As I mentioned, only 3 games until the break now. I believe it's the 15th of December that Rangers will be back in action against Hibs following these 3 games. The manager said it himself in the press conference. These are really all must-win games, aren't they? There's no margin for error.
100%. The way it's going at the moment, we can't afford to drop a single point. The 3 games left, when you look at them on paper, we should be winning the games, but St Johnstone, a tough place to go. Hearts are tough opponents on Wednesday night, and then next weekend, the last game before the World Cup, St Mirren away, who are having a very good season and are a strong side at home. So it's a huge 3 games. We can't afford to slip up. We can't afford to let that gap get bigger between us and Celtic. So hopefully, yeah, we kick on and it starts tomorrow. You've got to take it, the old cliche goes, 1 game at a time. And it's hugely important that, sorry, I said tomorrow, Sunday, sorry. It's hugely important that we go into this game and get a strong 3 points, because, like I said at the top of the show, we're really struggling with injuries just now. I mean, we could field a team of injured players that would be a pretty strong team. But yeah, it'd be good to see some of the youngsters get a run out with the view to getting a chance post-World Cup. That's the way I'd be looking at it just now, but at the same time, get the games won first and foremost.
Yeah, Patrick, I mean, how important from a kind of psychological point of view do you think it is that Rangers win these 3 games? Because the last thing they need is to be going into the break further behind, especially when hopefully, if they go in assuming that Celtic win all their games as well prior to the World Cup, if they go in just a few points behind and then they start to get players back from injury, it's going to give them a lot more than if they go into the break, say, 7 or 10 points behind, where even if those players are coming back, it's going to leave them a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah, I mean, winning out until we get to the World Cup is a prerequisite for not even the idea of success, but even thinking about any success this season. I don't think we shouldn't deny the fact that some people, I don't think, would be too unhappy if we drop a few points between now and November, because that would be the impetus to us to replace a manager. And some people think that sort of long-term gains we made over, despite the short-term losses. I think there's some credence to that argument, but I think we're all Rangers fans, so what we pay to watch is us to win and put in good performances. So at least in the short-term sense of staying close to a Celtic side, we're currently 4 points ahead. Yeah, that gap can't get any larger, because at least the way it appears to be trending is that they're not going to have any instability per se. They have a strong squad, quite stable. They might add a few players in January, but they don't seem to be one that will capitulate per se. Albeit we haven't seen them put under immense pressure in the last 5 or 6 months. So the return of a raft and a plethora of both bodies and skilled bodies will help us, hopefully after the World Cup and perhaps after the winter break with a few, maybe like Hadji. But no, I think it's an imperative and a prerequisite for us to be successful in any sense, is to keep the momentum going domestically that we've enjoyed, albeit with the blip from Livingston. But yeah, I think if we want to have any idea of lifting silverware, not just the Premiership, but even the Scottish Cup or the League Cup, if we sort of capitulate in these last 3 games, the winter will be incredibly difficult, and it won't be very fun going to Ibrox, I doubt.
Yeah, Kieran, what's your thoughts going into this game at the weekend? I mean, there's obviously been a poor result midweek against Ajax. I think it's a game that most of us were really just looking forward to getting out of the way, I would suggest. But last week against Aberdeen seemed like a really positive domestic performance. I mean, I was only keeping track of the game via our group chat, and it seemed even when Rangers went 1-0 down, there was still some confidence in the performance that they would get the result, which indeed they did. So are you feeling quite happy going into Sunday, despite what happened in midweek?
I've got mixed feelings, if I'm honest. I've just not really been happy with how we've went about things this season. Champions League, okay, like I'm willing to brush that aside. I wasn't expecting anything on Thursday night. Tuesday night. I'm all over the place today. Tuesday night, I was at the game, and even the mood around the stadium wasn't great. There's just not a very good mood about Rangers just now, and the fans, and it's no wonder. I just felt like a lot of the games, Aberdeen aside, right, keep on that. We played really well there. We need to be building on that domestically. Like that needs to be clear, that going with that style of play, we played with tempo, plenty of movement, something we have not seen for a long time. But in terms of this game at the weekend, we need to kick on. I think Patrick touched on it. We're verging on the manager really being under hot water when it comes to his job. I think if he drops points before this break, questions have got to be asked from the board regarding the manager. Can we afford to sack him or not? Maybe that's a subject for another day. But he needs to go into this game, and we need 3 points. Nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah, I mean, Patrick, I think the manager picked up on it in the press conference when he was asked about, almost, the question wasn't phrased in this way, but essentially asking, is the Europa League our level? And also, how do you kind of reflect on the Champions League with what's happened now? He basically said that, I would never say wish we hadn't had that PSV result and qualified for the Champions League. But do you think it will help the side that we can now just go from one domestic game to another, where the style of play is going to be relatively similar? Often teams will have 10 men behind the ball, rather than sort of flip-flopping between these two extremes, as we've seen for a couple of months now?
I mean, thankfully, it seems a pretty distant memory of football, of having sort of no football post-winter break. I think it was maybe 2018-19 after that, like Spartak Moscow group we had. I remember doing some data stuff, just looking at the difference in performances, like goal difference and expected goal difference when we had a midweek game, whether that be European or a cup game or a league game, versus when we had a full week to prepare. And I think the difference at that point was pretty marginal, nothing really. There's arguments both on either side, school of thought that you continue playing, you do well, you proliferate good morale, you keep the players running well. But I think that perhaps doesn't run true for us now, just because we don't have the bodies to manage a sort of healthy system of playing 2 games a week. If we had everyone there and we were winning and we were in the knockout stages of, let's say, the Europa League or the Champions League, of course you'd take that. But now it's at the point where we really need to pick our battles, just because we are verging on the area in which we have if another centre-back gets injured, we quite literally have no one to partner Leon King. If a winger gets injured, then we're in a situation in which we're not happy with our current options, and then we even have fewer. So I think the 1 week, one game a week wouldn't be what I wanted heading into the season. I would have loved for us to somehow be up playing European football post-Christmas, whether that be Europa League from coming third or a dream of coming second in Champions League group. But I do think of it being pragmatic, that there will be a benefit to it, and allow us to perhaps rotate a bit more, give people some minutes, try some new things out, because we will only have 1 game a week. And it also allows us to game plan better. Obviously, there's a point of diminishing returns when you focus too much on a team, but I think we'll be responsible, and we might see some sort of rejigging, just because we will have added time on the training pitch. Albeit, obviously, we need to get these 9 points if we have the same coach on the training pitch, or if we want someone new after.
Yeah. Kieran, just very quickly, because you did touch on it there, I don't want to go into too much detail about the manager, because we obviously have a show on Sunday, and it'll perhaps be easier to reflect on him following a performance. But if we were to win these 3 games, where do you think that leaves you with him personally? Because I know it's hard to kind of remove these Champions League results from the equation, but what I would suggest is there's not going to be any more, or it's highly unlikely there's going to be any more 7-1 losses or 4-0 losses that, perhaps we've not really been so accustomed to. So domestically, where would it leave you if we get what's expected in these next 3 games?
I think all we ask for is that we're winning games and we're challenging for the league. If you're asking me to be really honest, I was sitting on the fence for a long time, and the Europa League final bought the manager a lot of time, but at the moment I do not think he's the right man. Domestically, I've not been convinced. When I look at the team, I see a team that there's a part of me feels sorry for the players, in the sense that I don't think we look like we've got a game plan or a style of play, or there's any clear instruction to what we have to do on the pitch. When I look back at the games, take Aberdeen aside, I really can't rhyme off a game where I thought we've been excellent this year. Off the top of my head, I'm saying that. I know there has been a couple, but that's not good enough to go and win the league. I know we're a point better off than we were this time last year, but in the same sense, Celtic were a good bit behind us this time last year, and now they're 4 points ahead. So that's something we need to keep in mind as well. So that's why it's very important that we get 9 points from the next 3 games. But for me, I think the inevitable will come. I don't know if he'll last. I strongly believe he won't be here next season, but I'm being very negative there. But it would be wrong if I came on here and I wasn't honest.
Yeah, well, Patrick, let's turn to the game this weekend. I mean, we'll start a little bit with St Johnstone, just about the opposition, before we kind of move on to Rangers. I remember doing this pod with one of their fans before the home game at Ibrox, which ended up quite a comfortable 4-0 win for Rangers. I think at the time that the mood around St Johnstone, which is actually the area I'm originally from up there, it did feel quite negative. But since then, they have turned things around a little. They've won their last 2 games, and even the 2 losses prior to that, which was a 1-0 away defeat to Livingston, and obviously the 2-1 defeat to Celtic, which, I mean, if anyone remembers that game, I think that last goal was probably avoidable, but nonetheless, they did lose the game. What are you expecting from them on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the 2 recent wins, but they haven't lost by more than a goal in 2 months. Their last significant loss was against them. Actually, no, it was against us almost 3 months ago, 13th of August. And since then, they haven't lost by more than 1 goal, which is testament to sort of decent defense. I expect, like most games, for it to be a sort of hard-working, bordering on lethargic for us to watch, because they'll be difficult to break down. If you look at their sort of offensive ratings, defensive ratings, they plot really similar to Livingston, in the sense that when they win their games, they do so off the back of a solid defensive display, as opposed to just going and outgunning the opponent. And that'll be even more difficult coming up against a team like Rangers. Even if we aren't in best of form and we do have a sort of pick and mix defensive line, we still have the general quality, and we will dominate possession, so that we will be relatively will be peppered that often in goals, regardless of who's our goalie and how well we're playing. But they seem to be in good morale in the sense that they have had multiple positive results. Perhaps more important, as I mentioned, they haven't been battered in a while. So there's a sense of we've gone this far, albeit maybe obviously they played Celtic in that time, but they haven't played us since we battered them, to be fair. But there is this collective morale building. But I don't think they should pose anything that we can't take on per se. I think obviously it would be a considerable indictment on the team itself and the manager if we fail to take 3 points. But last season, our 2 away games at St. Johnstone were probably 2 of the worst games we played. We won 2-1, I think it was in September, Ruth penalty and a Tav wonder goal. And then perhaps the worst game of last season, not in the sense that we were terrible, but as we were saying, Johnstone and the pitch was sort of an embarrassment. And that was a 1-0 through Kamara. So I would rather take anything but those 2 games. So I just want to be entertained. And I do think, though, that there's no reason why we can't take inspiration from the Aberdeen game and sort of isolate the Champions League performances going forward, because that's a necessity. There's no option but to do that.
Yeah. Kieran, I think a couple of things to pick up on there. I mean, the manager touched on in the press conference how it is going to be a difficult game to Aberdeen. He mentioned how Aberdeen sort of pressed high up and that left a lot of space to exploit, which Rangers did very effectively. This Sunday is obviously going to be very different. Saints are going to pack the midfield. We had a comment come in there saying that we should persist with Sands and Lundstrom in the midfield. What are your thoughts on, first of all, that comment? And second of all, have you got faith that the team can break down St Johnstone? Because, as the manager said, Aberdeen was a slightly different game. They left space to exploit.
Yeah, firstly on the comment, saying we should stick with Sands and Lundstrom. While I agree with it, I think our hand's going to be dealt by what we've got available. In terms of centre-back, I think it will be Sands and King as centre-back. Was there any update regarding the...
I believe he said there was a day tomorrow to assess him. I don't know. There's a kind of debate there to be had. I'll come to you on that in a minute, Patrick, about whether we risk Davies. Well, there's no point even having it. It depends if he's fit or not. But yeah, Davies could still start, but remains to be seen. Yeah,
so for me, I'd like to see Kamara come back in. He seems to like playing at McDermott Park, like Patrick touched on. I might put a tenner on him because I think that's the only place he seems to score. Am I right in saying he's got 2 and 3 games up there and he never seems to score any other time? So, no, I'd like to see Kamara come back in. He's such a big player for us and we need freshened up in that midfield. Stephen Davis has done well being in there. Lundstrom obviously is your first name in the team sheet in the centre of the park, although I would like to see him in that more advanced role. It looked the game against Aberdeen and even before that the game against Livingston, the game sort of changed in its head when he started to get into the box and get further forward. I know that was the type of role that he played at in Sheffield United, so it's something that he's obviously good at, but when it came to here, he played in that sitting midfield role under Gio when he... Well, I was going to say when he first came in, but it looked like he was getting sold when he first came in. When he eventually got his chance to play midfield, and that's where he excelled, especially with Ryan Jack, who unfortunately is unavailable. So for me, it would be Lundstrom, Kamara, and take a pick from Tillman or Arfield in front of them in there. I'd be giving Stephen Davis a wee rest.
Yeah, Patrick, rather than kind of speculate on Ben Davies, because we can't really say until the manager assesses the lineups come out on Sunday. Let's talk about Glenn Kamara, because the manager said again today that he obviously came back in on Tuesday and is good to go on Sunday. Kieran said he would maybe like to see him get some minutes. I mean, is it maybe worth giving him a chance this Sunday? It's been a difficult time for him. He hasn't started a domestic game since the Old Firm loss. Obviously, part of that's been injury, but I think even prior to that, other than a pretty outstanding performance against PSV, I think he was kind of splitting opinion around the fan base. What do you think about him kind of more widely and also going into this Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, why not? We seem to be at the point where we've almost exhausted our options in centre mid, because whether it be structural or substantial or just on the basis of how they play on the day, we haven't looked like a good midfield in a while. So I guess trying something new, whether that be injury related or whatnot, will always be fine. To point on the Lundstrom, moving him into an 8, that's what I thought he would play as originally when he signed. I saw him as a more sort of physical contingency plan for Arfield when he would eventually leave. But for every reason, he's played at a 6 and he's done quite well. The fans take to that sort of player quite strongly just because it's emblematic of what we kind of like as a footballer in Scotland. I think Kamara still, at the time when GBB came along, and still he's a square peg in a round hole. He was sort of molded perfectly for the Gerrard system. He's a classy footballer, but his attributes aren't best positioned either to play as a 6 or an 8 in a GBB system. Not to say he cannot be effective in there. We've seen that at PSV. We've seen that in a plethora of European matches, but I just don't think he has that skill set that we need per se, domestically especially. Because what we need is as many players who are going to crash the box, get his goals, break the lines. Because realistically, we, outside of playing maybe Celtic home and away, and maybe like Aberdeen away, we only need 1-6 just because we have the defensive solidity everywhere else, and we'll get 67% of possession. So I think there's no reason not to give him a serious run in the midfield, even if it's just to get him in some good form, to put him in the shop window again, because his value has deflated quite significantly from the maybe 15 million we would have wanted after we got him a contract extension this time last year. But yeah, I think his sort of silkiness and nice moves and ability to spread the ball, we'll see, will be valuable against St Johnstone. I just wouldn't like to see him play alongside both Lundstram and Sands. I'd like to see him play maybe as a 6 alongside Lundstram with Tillman as well. Just because I think, again, as many attacking options as possible.
Yeah. Guys, one other player I want to pick up on before I ask you to kind of talk me through what your lineups would be is Ryan Kent. Now, I think he's had a lot of criticism this season, some of it well-founded, but a stat today kind of revealed that he was the Premiership's top chance creator this season. Now, Kieran, does that stat surprise you? And then secondly, I suppose, does it give you a bit more confidence than we perhaps might have had in him, given we know, that the contract is up, and I think, again, well-founded perhaps, people saying his head might have been turned. Has that stat perhaps changed anything for you?
Yeah, it's a funny one for me. I think he'll be the first to admit he's been off form. It's not been the classic Ryan Kent we knew when he first came in the door and developed into a great player that looked a threat every time he was on the ball. And you look at the Old Firm games where he has come alive, that they look like they're petrified to go near him. We've not seen that Ryan Kent in a long time. Now, the stat is good, and it's probably one of the stats that have actually went in his favour for a change, because I know when we speak about Ryan Kent, we speak about his numbers very often, and that they're maybe not up to the same standards as rival players in the same position as himself. But in terms of how heavily we rely on him, I think other teams have become accustomed to that and learned that if they can keep Ryan Kent quiet in the game, then we'll suffer badly. But in terms of his form, it's one of the ones where I think he's suffered that it's a very Dutch style of football that Van Bronckhorst plays. He likes his wingers to have the heels on the shy lines, and Kent suffered from that. I think Kent is a much better player when he's got that sort of free roll from wing to centre in behind the striker, not so much as a 10, but coming inside as an inverted winger, where he can either come inside or go wide. And I know from Jordan Campbell's great article from the Livingston game where he put the picture up of their tactics board, and there was one message on the tactics board, and it was keep Ryan Kent outside, don't let him cut inside. And I think you'll probably find that's on just about every one of the tactic boards around Scotland at the moment, because if he starts cutting inside, you run the risk of giving away fouls or a wee give and go here and there. But in terms of Kent himself, I think one of two things needs to happen. I think he should sign a new contract and see if he flourishes if a new manager comes in, or we should look to try and offload him, because 7 million has been a big outlay for him, given the situation we're in at the moment.
Yeah. Kieran, can I just stick with you for a minute, because I'm interested in something you picked up on there. I mean, you say that teams think that if we stop Ryan Kent, it has such a huge impact. Now, obviously, there's going to be pressure on Ryan Kent. He's playing for Rangers and his goal numbers do need to be better. But surely that also points to a wider failing on the right-hand side of the team if a team can go into a game and be so solely focused on one player because they're perhaps not as concerned about what's on the other side.
That's true. And Adam, it's one of these bugbears. How long have we had to cure this right wing sort of area? You look at previous games, and we had Arfield out there. I think it was a game against, was it Dundee at home? We had Arfield out there, and we were crying out for someone to go and beat the man, go and beat the fullback. And all the fullback knew that just show him back the way, he's not going to beat me for pace. And then we put Sakala in, and it's just not worked. We watched Sakala start the last 2 Champions League games. That's not worked either. For me, Sakala is a dangerous player when he's running at folk directly through the middle, but I just don't see him as a right winger. And then Matondo, I think, for me, after the Livingston game, I would have happy not to seen him in a Rangers top again. Reason being, I know I think he took a sore one, right? And I'm not jumping to conclusions here. The guy was having the nightmare of all nightmares when it comes to substitute appearances. He chases down after he loses the ball, the boy, straight into the ad board in front of the Union Bears. 5 minutes later, he's up the tunnel and he's taken off. And then 2 days later in the press conference, Van Bronckhorst said he's fit for the weekend. Now, if you've took a knock that bad, you need to be substituted. You shouldn't be fit for the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a case of feeling sorry for himself a wee bit, and you need to be a wee bit thicker skinned than that, especially playing for Rangers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Patrick, I'll come to you now on that kind of situation. I mean, what I will say on Sakala, and I do agree with Kieran in that Sakala can be an extremely frustrating player, because you watch him pick up the ball sometimes and run and you think, oh, this is it, and then it just sort of goes nowhere. I actually thought he was quite positive against Aberdeen last week. What are your thoughts on that kind of attacking situation just now?
No, yeah, I thought he was really good against Aberdeen. I understand that he equally frustrates, but he entertains. And I remember someone had asked me on Twitter, I said, I'd rather be frustrated than bored. I understand he has obvious drawbacks. He's not the most polished footballer, but I think he's been underplayed under both Van Bronckhorst and Gerrard. He gets numbers, which is imperative for us to be successful, and to perhaps compensate for the lack thereof for Brian Kent, at least in the goal scoring department, because obviously he does create chances and get assists. With that headline or that Opta piece graphic they put up, I wasn't really surprised about Kent getting tons of chance created. I was really surprised about Lundstrom's placement above Tavernier at number 2. But obviously that only deals with the quantitative aspect. It just does the sort of massive chances as opposed to the quality of chances. And that's where it really differentiates. If you look at the sort of expected assists produced, those players are nowhere to be seen. I think Matondo has our highest, then Sakala, and then finally Kent in like 15th position in the league. And that's a standings and statistic dominated by both Celtics midfielders and forwards. So I think that perhaps in combination with the chances created, the sort of mass of it, gives us a far better picture. So I think Kent is doing a lot, but they're not perhaps the greatest quality. But he has been lucky, though, that Čolak has been feasting off scraps and doing so very well. I think in regards to Matondo, he's been poor, especially at Livingston game, but I think he's young, and also the fact that he perhaps just doesn't fit in the sense of the way we're playing. He's only been here for 4 months. I understand Kieran's idea of not wanting to see him again, but I would give him a chance.
A wee bit harsh.
Yeah, but I don't think it's exclusive to you. I think that's probably something you saw a lot of people saying on Twitter, or a lot of people left Ibrox saying like, what a waste of money. But I would give him the benefit of the doubt, and as I assume with the managerial position, I would give him a chance under a new manager and see what he's got, because he still is 21. He has some nice physical potential, the goal scoring aspect that he showed off at Club Brugge, and he's a left winger even if we're trying to play him on the right, which is emblematic of our struggles and our inabilities to address the real problems in our team, it seems.
Yeah, we haven't had it. Oh, sorry, Kieran, please.
Could I throw a name into the hat here? I thought Alex Lowry done all right when he came on the other night. I know that he plays off the left or in the 10. Is this potentially something that we should be looking at? Because we know this guy's got bags of potential. He's young. We're now at a point where we have got so many injuries, it's unbelievable. He should be given his chance. I would not be unhappy at all to see Lowry start on Sunday. It's a toss of the coin between him or Leon King, who's our biggest asset at youth level at the moment. And I'd be delighted to see Lowry get more of a chance, even these games before the World Cup, to prove that he belongs in that first team, because let's be honest, that right wing slot is up for grabs. Maybe not his position, but if you can come in as a youngster and hold it down, then fair play to him.
Yeah, we had a comment come in there say that Sakala needs to get a run of games, and I have to say I would agree. I mean, the frustrating thing obviously is that, you know, he's only going to get sort of 3 on the bounce, 4 including last week, and then we're going to have over a month-long break. Patrick, can I just ask you what your thoughts are on Alex Lowry? Because as Kieran was saying, he is an option there, obviously.
Yeah, like everyone, I love him. It's always great to see both a youth prospect come to the academy, but also one who's exciting, has flair, a bit different from what we expect both at our own youth academy and youth academies across Scotland. So it's perhaps emblematic of a brighter future and a technical future. Obviously, that's something from the top down that's trying to be implemented in the club. You could see with the hires of throughout the club, Zeb Jacobs, Sarri Bowley trying to implement a game model that's consistent across the levels to produce a sort of type of football equated with Rangers, like you see with Ajax or Barcelona. Obviously, that will take time, and we'll probably never reach that stage, but at the point where we can create players who are ready-made for our team, and I think Alex Lowry is to an extent. I wouldn't put him on the right just because he isn't both naturally right-footed and has limited minutes playing senior football. But the sooner we see him play as a 10 or even as an 8 in games where we're going to dominate possession, the better. He unfortunately has suffered 2 injury setbacks this season, injured pre-season, which then saw his timeline pushed back. And then again with that stupid tackle in the B game around 2 or 3 months ago. And somehow he's managed to come back quite quickly. It was great to see him just make his Champions League debut alongside Leon King, who's played, I think, 400 minutes of our 540, which is incredibly impressive as well. I think the more we watch him, the better. And I think we need to give him a serious run out between now and the end of the season, at least, just so we can sort of give him a tryout to see if he can be a rotation to starting level player next season. See if we need to go into the market for another player, because there'll be plenty of traction, but if we can minimize that by promoting youth players, that's important. So I think he needs to be given a tangible run out just so we know what we have. Obviously, he's young, so he'll progress, but just so we can get a baseline to benchmark. So we're comfortable with giving him 2,000 minutes next season, so we don't have to go sign another sort of player or a project.
Yeah, I mean, someone has made the point that, Lowry obviously hasn't played a huge amount of football, so perhaps he might not start a game before the World Cup. And, I could sort of understand that if he left him out for these 3 games and gave him just that extra month to really build himself up again, having suffered, as Patrick said, 2 injury setbacks. But, excuse me, Kieran, someone has kind of echoed what you said at the start by saying that they have mentioned Lowry and Devine and McCann should all be getting more minutes. It was something you kind of mentioned at the start about youth players. Why do you feel that the time is now, just prior to the World Cup? I'm not saying I think this, but I suppose there would perhaps be a school of thought that would suggest we need the experienced players just for these next 3 games to get us to the World Cup.
Yeah, I think that's 2 different arguments in terms of we need the experienced players. The experienced players at the moment, I'm looking at guys like Tavernier and Lundstrom, who it's very clear that they're carrying injuries. For me, Tavernier's missing a yard of pace. Lundstrom's playing through the pain barrier. But I've been impressed when they've come in. I thought Charlie McCann's done excellent when he came in, especially the game at Ibrox. I know he got a lot of chances in the box, but the nerves come into play there when you're starting in front of 50,000 fans for the first time, and he did miss a lot of chances. But for me, the argument is if you're getting in the positions, you're going to score goals. Once he settles down, he's going to be good for us, and we do need that guy. And we spoke about it. Lundstrom arriving late into the box tended to change the game against Livingston. We almost won the game at the death. But for me, yeah, Charlie McCann could go in there, no problem. Lowry might have to be a wee bit more patient, given that it's going to be that Kent starts every game, and that it's a toss-up between Tillman and Arfield in that role that he would play in there. But you never know the way things are going. He could get his chance in there. Devine, for me, is one that might have to wait a wee bit longer, because you're never going to drop your captain. I know he's carrying an injury, but might be one of these ones, if we're out of sight by the hour mark, he should be getting his chance to get put in the team. But at the moment, we're hobbling over this World Cup line, and yeah, we've got the youth there. Why not use it? Leon King has showed that he's good enough. Maybe a small error the other night. He wasn't great in the game against Aberdeen, but it's all about learning. You need to be put in there, to be put under that pressure, and it's sink or swim at Rangers. And I think he's done all right. It's been a hard apprenticeship for him, but I'm quite satisfied at the moment. I'd say he's our biggest sellable asset.
Guys, we are going to have to wrap things up. I'm going to get your predictions. Just before I do, I should, of course, mention that Antonio Cholak thoroughly deserved his SPFL Premiership Player of the Month. I mean, it's kind of hard at this point to have a superlative to describe the guy. He's just banging the goals ever since he's come in, and we'll hope that he can continue to do so on Sunday. Patrick, I'll come to you first. What is your prediction for this weekend's match?
I'm going to go with 3-1 to Rangers.
3-1 to Rangers. Very good. Thank you for joining me, Patrick. Kieran, what about yourself?
I thought Patrick nearly said St Johnstone there. I was like, what are you doing, mate? I'll go 2-0 Rangers.
I'll go for a 1-0. I think it will be quite a tight game. I'd kind of half forgotten about those games that Patrick mentioned earlier. I suppose you can forgive me for that, especially the second one.
Probably to your benefit that you forgot about that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of raging that you reminded me, to be honest. I'll be thinking about it all night. Lads, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you to everyone who tuned in to watch and put in some comments there. We will be back on Sunday evening to dissect the game against St Johnstone. We've just had a 5-0 Rangers come in, so hopefully that's where we're at come Sunday evening. Please do remember to like and subscribe. Enjoy your evening and have a good weekend, folks.